Week 2 of the NFL season proved once again why fantasy football is nothing but absolute pain. But is it time to start panicking on these guys for the rest of the fantasy season? I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get a little nervous. Feeling the heat on these 10 guys. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. A couple of dud performances to start the year as the Colts go to 0-2. 7.1 points in week 1 and 5.1 points this week against a lackluster performance offensively all around for the Colts. But honestly, this Green Bay defense, nothing special, and that's what's starting to get concerning. But he's seeing a decent amount of targets. 8 targets in week 1, 7 targets this week, but just 4 and 3 receptions respectively, 31 yards, 21 yards, no touchdowns so far on the season. And it looks like this Colts passing attack is kind of broken. Like I said, the Green Bay Packers defense is nothing special. We saw Philadelphia move the ball up and down the field against them in Brazil, and we're kind of reliant on the Anthony Richardson experience. He's up and down as a quarterback. He struggles to throw the football sometimes, and it feels like his new guy is Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce seeing the majority of the scoring from that, and Jonathan Taylor also is a check down option. Now, this could have just been a bad game. Maybe the Colts checked out because Malik Willis was the Packers quarterback, and then the game plan kind of all went to hell when they were trailing by double digits early in this game. But I did not like what I see from the Colts this week. And, last week it was okay, but it was really reliant on those massive throws by Richardson. If they're not able to hit those home run throws, which it doesn't seem like they're focusing Michael Pittman on anyway, this offense tends to really struggle. I'm starting to feel a little stressed out here if I'm a Michael Pittman Jr. owner. You spent a decent amount of draft capital on him. You're expecting him to put up double-digit performances each and every week, and he just really hasn't done that for him. I'm going to put this at a level of 5.5 out of 10 on the meter. I think this is a little bit nerve-wracking. I want to see some more development from this Colts offense. It could have just been a weird, freaky thing, but I'm kind of holding my breath a little bit for the rest of the season. Okay, this is a tag team right here, Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Now, great week 1 performances for these two, 16.2 for Waddle, 26 for Tyreek, but not great news in Miami. This is really just an injury issue. Tua Tagovailoa out with a concussion, and we don't know what it's going to be, how long he's going to be out here. I think you just got to downgrade both of these receivers as a whole. Jaylen Waddle goes from a wide receiver 2 to a flex. Tyreek Hill, you're still probably playing every week, but I would say I'm more concerned about Tyreek than I am Jaylen Waddle because you're needing those huge home run performances from Tyreek. Only 6.6 points, and Skylar Thompson probably the quarterback for the Dolphins for the foreseeable future, and that just is not a recipe for success. But more importantly, has the Mike McDaniels offense been figured out? Really sluggish game most of the time against the Jaguars. They were better in the second half. Tyreek had the 80-yard touchdown that really helped his day. Other than that, it was just kind of ugly slog for them, and then awful before Tua went out with the concussion. The offense was terrible. They weren't able to do anything against a mediocre Buffalo Bills defense. Maybe it's just kind of Buffalo has their number, but I am starting to get very concerned that potentially the Dolphins offense has been figured out. And if Tua's not the quarterback and it's Skylar Thompson, maybe they go and sign Mike White and Mike White comes in and fills over. I just think it's kind of, I don't know. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling very anxious with these two guys because you invested a lot of draft capital in both of them and you want consistency and big plays. We saw this Dolphins offense, especially early in the season, put up huge numbers for the guys. I think you got to wait and see, but I might be more worried than other people. I'm going to give this one a solid 7.1 on the meter. I got some anxiety about these two. I'm not feeling great, probably more so about Tyreek than anything because I just don't think he's going to have those monster performances that we saw consistently from him last year. Okay, the holdout man himself, Brandon Aiyuk. Aiyuk, we know, held out for that new contract. He got himself played, and it's been a really kind of mediocre start to the season. Now, didn't expect much from him week 1 against a really good Jets secondary. Even though the Niners cooked against them, it was mostly on the ground. Only 4.8 points in week 1. 2 receptions on 5 targets for 28 yards. Nothing crazy here. But this week, I was expecting a much better week against a mediocre Vikings secondary. But really not much. 5 targets, 4 receptions, only 43 yards. Had one really nice catch for 22 yards today. But other than that, it felt like all the go-to action was to Debo. Everything was going to Debo. Debo was the focal point of this offense. George Kittle had a nice day. Mason had his day on the ground. And Brandon Aiyuk feels like the odd man out in this offense. You drafted Aiyuk as a guy who potentially could be your number one wide receiver, if not an elite number two wide receiver, depending on how you drafted him. And he just hasn't lived up to the hype. Now, maybe the Niners just have a bad way with the Vikings. They lost to the Vikings last year, lose to them again, surprisingly, this year for most people. Maybe it's just a bad matchup with this offense and a Brian Flores defense. I'm not super concerned about Brandon Aiyuk. Like I said, had the long holdout. It was kind of weird. You got to get that timing back in. It is still very early. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not panicking on Brandon Aiyuk. It kind of sucks because you expect him to be putting up better performances, especially where you drafted him. But I think the Niners are going to get this thing figured out. I think we're going to see more of him in the offense. So I'm going to put it at kind of a low stress level. I'm going to put it at a 4.3 right now for me as my panic on this one. I'm not super panicked, but it's something to monitor. It's something to keep an eye on, because if he is the odd man out in this 49ers offense, it's really going to hurt his stock and value. Okay, Mark Andrews, after a really surprising, awful week one performance against the Kansas City Chiefs, only 2 receptions for 14 yards, where you saw his counterpart Isaiah Likely going off against them. Bounced back a little bit this week, a 9.1 performance, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 51 yards, but still, it doesn't feel like Andrews is kind of a guy in this offense. Now, we could talk about the Ravens offense as a whole. It feels like it's kind of all over the place. Derrick Henry was struggling for a majority of this game, but he found himself a better finish and into the end zone. But yeah, you lose at home to the Ravens. You find yourself 0-2. Maybe because Mark Andrews is not being implemented in this offense is why they're not winning games. So I'm not going to stress out too much, but we saw another big week. I shouldn't say big week. We saw another highly focused week with Isaiah Likely in the offense. He seems to be a guy Lamar likes throwing to, and maybe we're seeing a turn of the tide. Andrews missed a good chunk of last season. Likely stepped up while Lamar was having that elite season. He became good target friends with him. And it's kind of maybe Andrews is getting older. We haven't seen an excellent Mark Andrews season for a few years now. He was good 2 years ago, but man, it's been a long time. It feels like I'm getting a little bit more concerned about Mark Andrews and what his role is in the Ravens offense and what the Ravens offense is in general. Only 23 points against not a great Vegas team and 20 points against a good Chiefs team. Now, you should have been 27. Lamar missed that. But still, it doesn't feel like Andrews is a guy in this offense anymore. And that's going to hurt him all around. I'm a little bit more worried about him. Like I said, I'm going to put this nearing a panic level. I'm at like an 8.2 on Mark Andrews. I'm starting to sweat this out. It just doesn't look like he's getting the focus he needs to. The Ravens offense is slogging through games through the first 2 weeks, and they got to figure a lot of things out. So 8.2 on the panic meter for Mark Andrews. Okay, Amari Cooper, Browns wide receiver, just really a awful start to the season for him. 3.6 points in week one against the Cowboys. That was a housing, and that offense really never could get going, and Deshaun Watson looked abysmal. But 4.1 points this week, had 8 targets this week, only 3 catches for 11 yards against a Jags defense who has done a good job. And Deshaun Watson looked a lot better this week. I mean, he wasn't perfect. He wasn't anywhere near great, but he was a lot better than what he was in week one. And there was no David Njoku, and we saw the same amount of targets to Amari Cooper and 1 more catch basically, but way less yardage. They are not looking for Amari Cooper down the field. They aren't able to throw the ball consistently to him. And this Browns offense, they get a win behind the good defense. I'm panicking. I am panicking. He's not a guy. I don't know if I can trust Deshaun Watson. They're playing the Jaguars. The Jaguars kind of are like that team that's like, oh, the Jaguars are the Browns. Who's going to screw up and lose this game first? And it was the Jaguars this week. I'm not fully involved in investing in Deshaun Watson as an offensive leader. Jerome Ford was okay today, but David Njoku's out for a while now. Amari Cooper just doesn't seem to have a connection with Deshaun Watson, and we saw this a little bit last year. He wasn't really great when Deshaun Watson was the quarterback for the Browns last year. He was much better when Joe Flacco stepped in. I can't believe I'm saying this, but maybe like it's a Jerry Jeudy is the guy in Cleveland. Just it feels disgusting and gross to say, but I'm fully in panic attack mode here on Amari Cooper. I'm sweating this thing out. I don't know if I can start him the rest of the year. And you drafted him to be potentially a wide receiver 2 or a flex play on most weeks. He's a guy that you want to have very good options for, and it just doesn't feel like you have that with him on this current Deshaun Watson Brown-led offense. I'm in full panic attack. I'm going like a 9.7 on the panic meter. I'm freaking out if I invested highly in Amari Cooper and I'm relying on him. And I have relying on him in one of my leagues. I have invested in him in my auction league. So I'm not happy right now. Why the hell did I believe in Deshaun Watson? I didn't. I just thought Amari Cooper is good. They'll get him the ball. Clearly, that's not the case, and it's really, really concerning. Okay, Cooper Kupp, this is strictly an injury concern, man. Cooper Kupp, obviously a great week 1 against Detroit, 32 fantasy points. We don't need to talk about that. And he was having an okay game today, and when the Rams were getting housed, I mean, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 7.7 points. He was doing a decent job, but he goes out with what is being reported as a high ankle sprain at the time of this reporting. And I'm really nervous about this. You know, I'm pretty high up on the panic meter for when it comes to Cooper Kupp and injuries. We saw him miss a good chunk of time last year with injury. He missed essentially all of the year before with an injury. So he's becoming an older, injury-prone wide receiver who is a guy who relies on his kind of like great route running, planting, sticking. He's not necessarily a fast guy, so he needs to be completely healthy, the entire body chain from top to bottom. And if he gets nicked up and he's picking up a high ankle sprain, that's a few weeks. We're already missing Puka Nacua, and there's a lot of concerns about this Rams offense. The offensive line is really bad. They looked awful today against Arizona. But from an injury standpoint, I think this is pretty concerning. You know, Cooper Kupp, like I said, dealt with a lot of injuries, and he just wasn't the same guy last year. He finished the year strong, but again, of course, he's got to pick up an early injury this season when Puka Nacua is already down, and he was off to a blistering hot start. Looked like old Cooper Kupp, the guy who won the Triple Crown a few seasons ago for the LA Rams. It just sucks to see. I'm going to give this one probably a spicy 7.9 out of 10 on the panic meter. I have a lot of anxiety when it comes to Cooper Kupp and dealing with injuries. I don't like it. I don't feel good about it. But hopefully, you know, he sits out a couple weeks, he gets back out there. But what a devastating blow for this Rams offense in back-to-back weeks. Okay, Sam LaPorta, man, number 1 tight end drafted, and I would say in almost every league, has been really, really, really slow to start this season. Only 8.5 points in week 1, only 5 targets, 4 receptions, 45 yards. But this week against Tampa Bay, only 3 targets, 2 catches, 13 yards, a 3.3 point performance for him. Look, I'm not super worried about this. Detroit's offense has looked a little weird through the first 2 games of the season. We saw them kind of get shut out in the second half against the Rams, and they really struggled to move the ball against this Tampa Bay defense. But hey, maybe Tampa Bay's defense is a lot better. They got some guys back on the defensive line. They were able to stop Detroit's run, and that kind of takes away from their play-action game. They did a great job getting after Goff, making him uncomfortable behind that great offensive line, and I don't think the game script really just developed for LaPorta. I'm not freaking out here. I still think the Lions are a really good team. And look, like I said, they've struggled offensively. It's probably because they haven't gotten a guy like LaPorta involved. He's kind of a cog to this offense. He was so good last year, in particular in the red zone. We saw the Lions really struggle there today, settled for a bunch of field goals instead of getting those touchdowns like they normally do. I think this could be a problem. I think they're going to get this adjusted. I'm going to trust Ben Johnson and this offense to get some things tweaked out, figured it out. I'm going to be low on Sam LaPorta here. I'm going to say I'm like at a 3.5 out of 10 on the worried scale. I'm not really worried about him. He's going to get it figured out, but it really does suck when you get back-to-back dud performances and you drafted him to be your number 1 stud tight end early in drafts. It does suck, but I think they're going to get this figured out. Not really worried about Sam LaPorta moving forward. Okay, a guy we were really high on going into the season, my man Christian Kirk for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Awful week 1, only 1 catch on 4 targets for 30 yards, and 3 targets, 1 reception for -1 yard this week against the Cleveland Browns. A 0.9 fantasy point performance. He couldn't even get the full PPR point. I'm really concerned, man. This Jags offense does not look good. It looks all sorts of out of whack. The run game was a little bit better this week, but Doug Peterson's play calling feels confusing at best. The offensive line is atrocious. They cannot protect Trevor Lawrence. Now, the weather wasn't good in Jacksonville. Not a great combination when it's a torrential downpour and a Browns defense who is lights out sometimes. Now, we know the Browns defense is the worst defense in the world on the road, and they're awesome at home. Maybe they coming back down to like hey, maybe we'll be like the top 5 defense at home and, like an average defense on the road. I think it was really bad all around circumstances for the Jaguars, but I'm panicking. I am panicking right now. I thought Christian Kirk was going to be a steal for fantasy this year. I thought you could snag him up a little bit later in the draft and he was going to be a definite flex play most weeks for you, potentially a wide receiver 2 guy if you're on bye, dealing with buys and injuries. I thought he was going to have a really strong season, easily be the number 1 wideout in this offense as they ease Brian Thomas Jr. into it. But nope, Brian Thomas Jr. is the guy, and they can't really do much offensively as a result of it. It feels like the offense is slow, sluggish. They can't protect. This is bad. I'm full panic mode on Christian Kirk. I'm going to go a 9.4 out of 10. I'm really panicking about him moving forward. I just don't think anything is right with this Jags team. They were frauds. Like, I'll admit it. I think the Jags were frauds. I picked the Jags to make the playoffs. They look like frauds right now, and I don't know how they get it fixed. It looks more of the same of the awful collapse they suffered last year, and I just don't know how they're going to get Christian Kirk more involved, how they're going to be able to get him the ball. And he's clearly not Trevor's guy right now. And is Trevor even a guy? They paid him all that money. Is Trevor even a guy? So I'm panicked very much so about Christian Kirk's future. And finally, Diontae Johnson. And on the panic scale, I don't know if this is panicked or more of like, what the hell were we thinking drafting a Carolina Panther? Like 3.9 points, 4.5 points, but we were expecting him to put up wide receiver 1 numbers, or wide receiver numbers like he's a number 1 wide receiver in an offense. But I mean, this Panthers offense is so much worse than we could have possibly fathomed. I feel bad. I really like Bryce Young, but Bryce Young ain't it. He is not an NFL quarterback. There's nothing they could do to fix this offense. It's broken. He's broken now. He could get a bounce back at somewhere else. We've seen it before. We will see it again. Potentially Bryce Young is that guy. But this is more of like, what were we thinking? Why did we draft anybody on this Panthers offense? 3.9 points week 1, 4.5 points. You can't play Diontae Johnson at all with any sort of consistency. I can't even think of a team that's bad enough on defense that's also bad on offense where you'd feel comfortable that the Panthers could move the ball and have sustained drives and potentially, I mean, maybe we could find a touchdown poach here or there, but no touchdowns this week, 1 touchdown last week, very late against the Saints. I don't know, man. What were we thinking with Diontae Johnson? I don't know. This was dumb all around on all our parts. We were way too optimistic on him. I don't know. Send him into the sun with the rest of these guys. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Let me know in the comments below who you are freaking out about. I'll be here to console you potentially, or I'll be freaking out with you because, man, there were a lot of guys that I was so high on that it doesn't feel great about. Oh, man, why does fantasy football always have to do it to us? But make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. We got all your fantasy football needs covered throughout the week. We got your must starts and sits for running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, every single matchup, your must stream defenses and kicker video. We got waiver wire targets. We got boomer bust players, new fantasy content every single day. Again, like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see y'all tomorrow.